You need to hear what happened on Christmas Eve, because it's a story about the moment everything changed. The moment I stopped being the person they wanted me to be and became someone they couldn't control. The dining room at the Vance estate was exactly as I remembered. The crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, the fresh pine scent mixed with expensive red wine. And beneath it all was something else. Fear. Or maybe that was just me. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the table with the kind of stillness that made everything around him seem smaller. My mother, Cynthia, twisted her pearl necklace nervously, her eyes jumping between us like she was watching a tennis match she didn't want to see. And my younger sister, Brittany, had this little smirk on her face, the expression of someone who already knows how the story ends. But she didn't. None of them did. "You're not leaving this table until you sign," my father said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Everything about him carried weight. The document in front of me was a quick claim deed, simple, elegant in its cruelty. It transferred my ownership of the ancestral land, the only thing my grandmother had left specifically to me, to a holding company controlled by my father. The ultimatum was just as simple: sign this or walk out tonight with nothing but the clothes on my back. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I was still the failed artist, the disappointment, the daughter who couldn't make it in their world of high finance and ruthless ambition. The girl who'd spent years eating instant noodles while they dined on steak. The girl building dreams while they built resentment. Except they didn't know about the dreams I'd actually built. I picked up the pen. Brittany's smirk widened. My mother let out a small, relieved breath. My father actually smiled, that thin, triumphant curve of his lips that had haunted my childhood. They thought I was breaking. They thought I was submitting. I was calculating. I was remembering every insult, every dismissal. Every time they'd made me feel small so they could feel big. I was remembering my 19th birthday, standing in my mother's kitchen with $2,000 in crumpled 20s, my entire art school fund, because she said she needed medication, and she was my mother, and she was hurting. I was remembering finding her 2 days later, beaming as Brittany twirled in a brand new prom dress. "Worth every penny," she'd said. I looked my father directly in the eye. "I'm not signing this," I said, and my voice was steady. "And I'm not leaving." The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb about to detonate. "You will sign it," my father said, dropping his voice an octave. "Or you are no longer my daughter. You are a trespasser, and I will have you removed." He reached for his phone. I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed hard, sliding across the polished wood until it hit the centerpiece. "That's not a signature," I said. "That's an eviction notice." My father stared at the envelope like it was a venomous snake. "What is this?" "Open it," I said. "Or don't. The outcome is the same." He ripped it open. I watched his eyes scan the first page, watched the exact moment confusion turn to shock, and then to pure, unadulterated terror. It wasn't the quitclaim deed he'd prepared. It was a foreclosure notice, and the name of the lender wasn't a bank. It was Ether Corporation, my company. "You see, Dad," I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table. "You didn't know I founded Ether Corp 5 years ago. While you were telling your friends I was a failed painter living in a studio apartment, I was building one of the largest defense contracting firms in the country. And last month, when your gambling debts became too much for your standard creditors, they sold your bad loans. To me." Brittany laughed, that nervous, high-pitched sound of someone who doesn't understand the game yet. "You, a CEO?" she said. "Please, you can't even afford rent." "Check your email, Brittany," I said, not taking my eyes off my father. My sister rolled her eyes, pulled out her phone, and tapped the screen. I watched her face go from smug to completely slack in about 3 seconds. "I also acquired the boutique financial firm you work for this morning," I continued, my voice calm and level. "As the new owner, I ordered an immediate audit. We found the embezzlement. You're fired, Brittany. Effective immediately. And my legal team is already drafting charges." She dropped her phone. It clattered onto her china plate and cracked the porcelain. My mother made a small, choking sound. "Alexis, what are you doing? This is your family." "No," I said. "This is a business transaction, and you are all in default." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow falling on the expansive lawn. "This house? It's held by a shell company that was part of the assets I acquired. Under the terms of the corporate housing agreement you signed to hide your assets from the IRS, this property is for employees only. Since I just fired all of you from your respective positions in my subsidiary companies, your right to occupancy has been terminated. You're trespassing." I turned back to face them. They looked like statues frozen in a tableau of ruin. My father was purple with rage but couldn't speak. The papers in his hand were shaking. My mother was weeping silently, ruining her expensive makeup. Brittany looked like she was about to be sick. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "You have 10 minutes to gather your personal effects and leave," I said, checking my watch. "Security is already at the gate to escort you off the premises. Don't take anything valuable. It belongs to the company now." I turned my back on them and started toward the door. I felt a surge of triumph, hot and intoxicating. I had won. I had flipped the board. I had taken back everything they'd stolen from me. I thought it was over. I was wrong. I'd just walked into the real trap. My hand was inches from the brass door handle when it slammed back toward me. The impact cracked through the room like a gunshot. My father was standing there, his face flushed deep and ugly red, his chest heaving. He wasn't the broken man I'd seen 10 seconds ago. He was the tyrant I remembered from my childhood, the man who used fear as currency. "You think you can just walk out of here?" he hissed, leaning in close enough that I could smell the stale wine on his breath. "You think you can destroy this family and just walk away?" I stepped back, creating space. "I'm not destroying anything, Richard. I'm repossessing my property. Now move." He didn't move. Instead, he locked the deadbolt. The click echoed through the foyer. Trevor, Brittany's fiancé, stepped forward. He adjusted his silk tie, his expression shifting from shock to something darker, to a predator's calm. "The law is funny about possession, Alexis," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "You might own the paper, but possession is 9/10 of the law, and right now, you are on private property, making threats and behaving erratically." I felt a prickle of warning at the base of my neck. This wasn't just anger, this was a script. They had rehearsed this. And then the performance began. My mother, who had been weeping into a napkin moments ago, suddenly let out a shriek that could have shattered glass. "My necklace!" she screamed, clutching her throat. "The diamond necklace! It's gone!" She looked at me, her eyes wide with faint horror. "She took it. I saw her near the coat rack. She took the heirloom necklace." It was clumsy theater, desperate and raw. But they committed to it with terrifying intensity. Brittany pointed a shaking finger at me. "I saw her too. She put it in her pocket when she came in." The necklace in question was a vintage piece my grandmother had supposedly left to my mother. It was insured for $500,000. It was their financial safety net, the one thing they hadn't sold yet. I stared at them, fascinated by the sheer audacity. "Empty your pockets," my father commanded, holding out his hand. I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "You've got to be kidding me. I'm not playing this game." Trevor pulled out his phone. "I'm dialing 911, he announced, his thumb hovering over the screen. "Grand larceny. Theft of property valued over $500,000. In this state, that carries a mandatory minimum sentence." He paused, and a cruel smile played on his lips. "Unless you sign that quick claim deed right now and maybe transfer those acquisition rights back to your father, we might be persuaded to drop the charges if you show remorse." It hit me then. The true depth of their depravity. This wasn't just a reaction to my eviction notice. They had planned this. They had invited me here tonight not just to bully me into signing, but to frame me if I refused. It was a win-win for them. Either I signed over my inheritance or I went to prison, and they collected the insurance money on the stolen necklace. My mother lunged forward before I could react, shoving her hand into the deep pocket of my wool coat. I tried to push her away, but my father grabbed my arms, pinning them to my sides. I felt her hand rummage, then withdraw triumphantly. A stream of diamonds dangled from her fist, catching the chandelier light. "I found it," she sobbed, turning to Trevor. "She stole it. She tried to steal our legacy." I looked at my mother's face. There was no shame there, no hesitation, only a twisted kind of relief. This is the trap of normalizing cruelty. To them, destroying me wasn't a crime. It was a necessary sacrifice. In their warped reality, I was the villain because I refused to be the victim. They needed me to be the failure, the thief, the bad seed. Because if I wasn't those things, then their own mediocrity was their fault. They had to criminalize my existence to justify their own survival. If sending their own daughter to prison meant they kept their lifestyle for another year, that was just the cost of doing business. Trevor hit the call button on his phone. "Officer, I need to report a robbery in progress," he said into the receiver, his eyes locked on mine. "We have the perpetrator detained." I stood still, the cold air from the window seeping through the glass. They thought this was the end. They thought the handcuffs would be the period at the end of the sentence. They didn't know I had written the whole book, I stood in the center of that room, surrounded by the people who shared my DNA, feeling the walls of their greed closing in. Trevor was on the phone with the police, his voice calm and authoritative, spinning a narrative of a family betrayed by a thief. My father was guarding the door like a prison warden, but my eyes were fixed on my mother. She was still clutching the diamond necklace, her knuckles white, tears streaming down her face with practiced elegance. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar, and as I watched her, the room seemed to tilt. It slid me back 10 years into the past. I was 19 years old, standing in the kitchen of our old house, the one they lost before moving into this corporate estate. My mother was sitting at the table, sobbing into her hands, telling me she needed medication for a condition she refused to name. She said it cost $2,000. She said they didn't have it. She said she was in pain. I didn't have $2,000. I had a savings jar with money from waiting tables intended for art school. It was everything I had, but she was my mother and she was hurting, so I gave it to her. I handed over my future in a Ziploc bag full of crumpled 20s. She hugged me, told me I was her angel, her savior. 2 days later, I came home early from a double shift. I found my mother and Brittany in the living room. Brittany was twirling in a shimmering prom dress, laughing. My mother was beaming, clapping her hands. "It's perfect, darling," she said. "Worth every penny." I saw the receipt on the table. $2,000, the exact amount of my angel money. She hadn't bought medicine. She had bought a dress for the golden child. When I confronted her, she didn't apologize. She looked at me with cold, dead eyes and said, "Don't be selfish, Alexis. Your sister needs to look the part. You can always work more shifts." They broke me that day. They taught me that my dreams were currency for their vanity. But as I looked at my mother now, 10 years later, holding the necklace she had planted on me, I didn't feel broken. I felt a cold, hard clarity settling in my chest like ice. The girl who gave up her tuition money was gone. The woman standing before them was the CEO of a defense contractor, and she knew exactly how to handle a hostile asset. "Mom," I said, my voice slicing through the theatrical sobbing. "You're really going to do this? You're going to send your own daughter to prison for grand larceny, a charge that carries 10 years, just to keep up appearances?" Cynthia stopped crying instantly. She lowered the necklace, her face smoothing into a mask of stone. "You owe us this, Alexis," she hissed. "We gave you life. If you can't be successful, if you can't bring value to this family, then you can at least be the sacrifice that saves it. We need that insurance money, and we need you out of the way before you ruin Brittany's wedding with your poverty." There it was, the naked truth. I wasn't a person to them. I was a resource. When I had money, they took it. When I had nothing, they tried to harvest me for parts. "You think I owe you my life?" I asked, a dark amusement bubbling up. "Because you birthed me? That's a debt you could never repay." My father growled from the door. "Actually," I said, "I think the debt has been settled." I looked at each of them in turn. My father the tyrant, my mother the parasite, my sister the beneficiary, and Trevor the enforcer. "You spent years draining me dry. You thought the well was bottomless. But you forgot one thing about digging holes, Mother. Eventually, you dig deep enough to hit something hard, something that doesn't break." In that moment, I stopped looking at them as family. They ceased to be my parents and my sister. They became targets. They became liabilities, and I knew exactly how to liquidate them. Trevor ended his call with a satisfied click of his tongue. "The police are 5 minutes out," he announced, sliding his phone back into his pocket. "And luckily for us, Sheriff Miller is on duty tonight. He and your father go way back. Golf buddies, I believe." He smirked at Richard, who nodded, the color returning to his face. The fear was gone, replaced by the ugly confidence of men who knew the system was rigged in their favor. They thought they had won. They thought the local badge coming up the driveway was the ultimate authority. I didn't argue. I didn't try to run. I simply backed up until my shoulders touched the cool plaster of the wall, then I raised my left wrist. A single tap on the sapphire face of my smartwatch initiated the sequence. The screen pulsed once, a silent digital heartbeat. Ether protocol engaged. It wasn't a panic button. It was a summons. "You can stop checking your watch, Alexis," Brittany sneered, wiping her eyes. "No one is coming to save you. Your little artist friends can't help you now." I looked at my sister, really looked at her. She was standing in a house she no longer had the right to occupy, wearing clothes bought with embezzled funds, mocking the woman who now owned the debt on her entire existence. "You're right, Brittany," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "My friends aren't coming. My security team is. And they don't paint landscapes. Trevor laughed, a dry barking sound. Your security team? What, a couple of mall cops? Alexis, give it up. You're trying to bluff a room full of sharks. Sheriff Miller isn't going to care about your delusions of grandeur. He's going to see the stolen necklace. He's going to see the deed you tried to force your father to sign. And he's going to cuff you. You're relying on local corruption, I said. It's a solid strategy for a DUI or a noise complaint, but you made a mistake. You escalated this to a federal level when you tried to extort a defense contractor. I pushed off the wall and took a step toward them. They flinched instinctively. Let me review the ledger before the sheriff gets here, shall we? I asked, my tone conversational, like we were discussing the weather. 2008, the warehouse fire at your father's distribution center. The insurance payout was $2 million. The fire marshal ruled it accidental, but the forensic accountant I hired found the wire transfer you sent to the arsonist 3 days before the blaze. My father's face went gray. What? He whispered. 2020, I continued, turning to my mother. The Save the Children Gala. You raised $500,000, but the charity you registered doesn't exist. The money went into an offshore account in the Caymans. I know because I bought the bank that holds the account last week. Cynthia gasped, clutching the necklace tighter. You can't know that. And tonight, I finished, looking at Trevor. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping, false imprisonment, extortion, attempted grand larceny by fraud. I tapped my temple. I'm not just a CEO, Trevor. EtherCorp builds surveillance systems for the Pentagon. Did you really think I walked into a hostile negotiation without a wire? Every word you said, every threat, every admission about the necklace being a setup, it's already been uploaded to a secure server and forwarded to the Justice Department. The room went dead silent, the kind of silence that happens when a predator realizes it has bitten into something poisonous. Trevor stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. You're wearing a wire? I'm wearing a fully encrypted cloud sync biometric recording device, I corrected, and it caught everything. You're lying, Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking. You're just trying to scare us. Dad, she's lying. My father looked at me. For the first time in his life, he didn't see his disappointment. He saw a threat. He saw the end of his world. Sirens grew louder as red and blue lights flickered across the snow-covered windows. I checked my watch. Right on time, I said. Trevor exhaled in relief. It's the sheriff, he said smugly. Doesn't matter what you have. Miller will take your recording. You're finished. He flung the door open. Officer, in here. We caught the thief. I stood still as they smiled at me, convinced that help had arrived. They had no idea they'd just sealed their own fate. Sheriff Miller entered, genial and familiar. Richard, he said. Robbery? My father slumped into rehearsed grief. It's my daughter. She stole Cynthia's necklace. We found it on her. Miller turned to me, his eyes cold. Is that true? It was planted, I said evenly. And if you arrest me, you'll be aiding federal wire fraud. He scoffed. You've got a lawyer's mouth. Trevor stepped forward, displaying a video on his phone. A woman in my coat, stealing the necklace. It was crude, a deep fake. Brittany was barely hiding her smile. That's fabricated, I said. Save it for the judge, Miller replied, snapping on the cuffs. My mother sighed theatrically. Trevor whispered something triumphant. That device of yours, it'll disappear. With that video, you're done. They glowed with victory. Take her out, my father said, and leak the footage. As Miller dragged me forward, I smiled. You checked the driveway, I said, but not the airspace. The roar hit seconds later. Snow whipped into a vortex as the front door exploded inward. Federal agents descended. Miller dropped instantly. Trevor froze. My parents stared in horror. An FBI agent approached me. Miss Vance, are you hurt? Just detained, I said. My cuffs were removed. My mother screamed. She's the thief. I picked up the necklace and smashed it on the marble floor. It shattered. Diamonds don't break, I said calmly. Glass does. I produced a bill of sale. You sold the real necklace 6 months ago. I bought it back. It's in Zurich. Trevor collapsed. He understood what that meant, what it all meant. You filed a false police report, I continued. Planned insurance fraud. Coordinated it digitally. That's federal wire fraud and kidnapping, the agent added. We have the audio, my father pleaded. We're your family. I felt nothing. This isn't tragedy, I said. It's surgery. I looked at the agents. They're all yours. They were led out in cuffs, screaming into the snow. I watched them go without turning away. This time, I didn't look back afterward. Later, my CFO called. "Do you want to acquire the house?" she asked. I looked at the mansion, a mausoleum of everything I used to want to be. "No," I said. "Let it burn itself out." The car pulled away from the driveway. The snow was still falling. The world was quiet. That night, I didn't lose a family. I survived one. And for the first time in my life, I was free.